Okay.
But I'm meeting some other Sydney and
Well, I don't know.
well, Belinda.
Right. So that's the connection. Yeah.
Yeah, I invited Deborah, Nathan, and Alex.
That's what he told me as soon as I walked in. And I said, yeah, Greg told me that. He said you guys were really cheap to bring in. So that's what he was going to do. He definitely feels a little like he's having a tough time with soft money.
Thrown into a new place. All these connections here.
Well, and he said he's like struggling between. Right there, just keep one leg. Yeah, that's where your home is now. You actually have here the same way. Okay, Susan. Hey, Susan, should we start? Yeah. Okay. So I think we're going to get started now. I'm Deb Niemeyer. This is the ITS seminar. So it's my pleasure today to ask someone to turn off their phone. No. It's my pleasure today to introduce Greg Rowengould, and I'm really happy to have him here, mostly because I get a weekend visit, which is just wonderful. But Greg was one of my PhD students. He finished, about 5 years ago. And then he spent 2 years at NRDC as a science fellow. And then from NRDC, he went on and went to the University of New Mexico as an assistant professor. And he's been there like 2 years, third year. And he started off at NRDC doing a lot of air quality work. And his work has most recently appeared in Transportation Research Part D. And it's really interesting stuff. It's sort of taking this notion of air quality modeling and injecting it in the regional planning process, something we don't do right now, or dispersion modeling. And more recently, he's been doing some very cool stuff in Albuquerque, working on sort of the intersection between infrastructure prioritization, particularly bikes, which you'll hear about today, and also on sort of climate change issues in Albuquerque. So anyway, he's great. I'm so happy to have him here. So please welcome Greg.
Thanks, Deb. Okay, so as Deb sort of explained, my main research focus really isn't bicycles, but I was a student in Davis, and I've been riding a bike since I was a little kid. And whenever the opportunity comes up, it's something I like to do. And I did a little bit of bicycle work in the past when I was a student here. And recently in New Mexico, there's been a lot of interest from the Regional Planning Agency and the city to, in this case, evaluate how effective their investments in bicycle infrastructure have been. Are they making a difference in the number of people that ride their bikes? And this is important to Albuquerque and the MPO there because they've been using the CMAQ funds, Congestion Management Air Quality Funds, from the federal government. And so these investments are supposed to be reducing traffic and or improving air quality. And under MAP 21, that stuff needs to be quantified now. So that's kind of where this started from. So I'm going to show you a little bit about New Mexico and Albuquerque and some of the bicycle stuff that goes on there, which I was totally unaware of until I moved there. I didn't even really know where Albuquerque was. And then some research we've done, which I think is kind of, they're simple little studies, but they, I think, turned out to be pretty informative. Okay, so there's two parts to this presentation. The first part is, does bicycle infrastructure reduce vehicle use? That was kind of the first question the MPO wanted to know. We built this stuff. We know there's people using it, but are there less cars on the road? Right? Has it improved traffic and air pollution? That type of thing. And this presentation is not super long, so you feel free to ask any sort of clarifying question. If something comes up that's confusing, we can deal with that, and then we can just hold big picture questions towards the end. I don't think we're going to be under any time pressure. So we'll start with, what do we know or think we know? We know that people who ride bicycles value bicycle infrastructure. So if I go and ask you, and probably most of you ride bikes because you're in Davis, do you bicycle path or this bicycle lane or cycle track or whatever? Most studies have found that people will go out of their way to use these things. They'll state that they're willing to pay some amount of money to use them. There seems to be some value to them from cyclists. So I've cited some studies here that have shown most cyclists will spend some extra time, 16 minutes for a bike lane and 5 minutes for a bike path. We did a willingness to pay study. One of my students just on campus did a simple study of some students in classes around campus and asked them, how much longer would you be willing to make a trip to the cycle track, and then ask them how much they would accept to work an extra hour, and translated that into willingness to pay, and we found some of these numbers here.
Is that extra time on a 2-day trip?
This is just a one-way trip to campus from where the students live. 20 minutes was the sort of the base, and then we asked, would you? Yeah, they were given a whole variety of different times from this baseline. I'm just mentioning this as this is just a little study that the student did. And there was another study that was done by some other authors that was a little more comprehensive, and they find some higher costs for a similar 20-minute trip. But the point here is that when we interview current cyclists, we can find that they value this infrastructure in different ways. And people have So we kind of know that if you ride a bike, and I stop you on your bike and ask you these questions, you value this. So we also know that if we go out and look at a bunch of different cities, that the cities that have more bicycle infrastructure tend to have more cyclists. Right? And there's been a number of these studies. There's been 2 big ones I've cited here. This is actually data from one of them. And the type of analysis is basically sort of how many, sort of what the bicycle mode share versus how many bicycle lanes and paths are there per person or per area or some normalized measure. And there's a positive association with it. Of course, one of the problems here is it's really difficult to figure out the causation. There may have been a lot of cyclists, and so they put pressure on the government to build them better bicycle infrastructure. As we saw in the previous slide, cyclists prefer some of the cycling infrastructure. But we don't know if that infrastructure actually caused more people to bike. And so this is another piece of evidence, but it's not conclusive. And then we also know that when you do these type of stated preference studies and you ask someone, in this case, would you rather ride your bike on this road or this road? Okay, but you're going to pick that one. Probably. I mean, some people will pick this one because they'll know, well, that one's probably more direct or something. But when we ask non-cyclists, particularly, so those other 2 types of studies are always just looking at people who currently ride their bike. So these type of studies get more at the people that aren't riding their bike yet. So you might just survey the general population or the students or whoever and ask, if I gave you this street over here on the right, are you more likely to ride your bike, even though you've never ridden a bike before? You'll probably say, well, yeah, maybe. It looks better, it's safer. But we don't actually know if you do. You just say you might. And it would be hard to really know how you would react to something that you've never experienced before or done. So that's kind of a limitation these days. We have a lot of different evidence about bicycle infrastructure and bicycle paths. People value it. Cyclists value it. People that don't currently bike seem to say they'd value it and might try it out too. But what we really wanted to know is there some way to find out if people using this infrastructure, or if this infrastructure has actually caused people to start riding a bike. So that was our goal. We don't know. We have some evidence that indicates probably, but I wanted to see if we could add to this. So we'll step back. I work at UNM. It's in Albuquerque, which is right there in the sort of northern center part of New Mexico. was 25 degrees and snowing when I left to come here. So if you have some vision of some warm desert or something, that's not very accurate. The winters are cold. It is sunny almost all of the time, except for rains. The summers aren't as hot as here either. Albuquerque is where 50% of the population in New Mexico lives. New Mexico has about 2 million people, and 1 million live in Albuquerque. Albuquerque is a pretty big city, though its land use pattern is probably closer to Davis. It's very suburban. So that's a little bit about New Mexico. And here I have a couple of pictures of what the MPO and city have done with their CMAQ funds and the type of infrastructure we're going to be evaluating. And these are pretty nice paths. These are long-distance, grade-separated bicycle paths. Some of them are quite scenic, like this, along the Rio Grande. We have these, they've built these big bridges to go over. So the Rio Grande goes through the middle of Albuquerque. You should know that. That's an important feature of all this. It kind of separates the city. And there's an interstate that also runs along there. So they have these pretty elaborate bridges to cross the interstate and the river. Here's another one crossing interstate. Actually, I don't know if we can use the lights. Still not great to see, but this is some huge elaborate bridge they built for like millions of dollars. Here's another picture. So this was some part of the question and motivation for us. They've been spending a lot of money on this stuff. A lot of it was federal funds, and so we wanted to know how it works. And here's a map of what we've got so far in Albuquerque. And it's not totally connected, but the red lines are the bicycle paths, and those are like those pictures that I showed you. These are really high-quality facilities. They're totally grade-separated. I mean, there's either tunnels or bridges over the roads. And downtown is right in this area. And sort of these red lines, these paths, everything sort of feeds into downtown. So these network, while not totally comprehensive, kind of feed from where people live to where a lot of people work. So they function as sort of commuter routes rather than recreational trails. Even though they get a lot of recreation as well. And we have one bicycle boulevard that doesn't go all the way through. That blank spot's actually the campus. So what we did was there is an annual Bike to Work Day thing. It's like a national thing, and Albuquerque puts on a pretty big effort. And the bicycle advocacy groups, the city, and the MPO go out and set up little tables like this. These are my students. We did one on campus. They go all around the town at different areas along the bicycle paths and the bicycle networks. And they offer coffee and food and free lights and educational material to whoever stops by. And most people stop by. I mean, 60 to 70% of cyclists going by will stop at these tables and chit-chat and grab some coffee. And they give out free T-shirts. I rode my bike to work, etc. And so what we've started doing the last 2 years is tagging onto this thing and distributing a survey. Started 2 years ago with a simple survey asking, trying to get at how people are using these bicycle paths. And we've refined that this year, and I'm going to talk about that. And our goal is to keep doing this every year and start building a time series. The MPO pays for it all, and all I have to do is have some students volunteer to hand out coffee and stuff. So it's a good deal. And this is the main question we asked, a little bit paraphrased. So we intercept these cyclists at these little stations set up by volunteers on Bike to Work Day, and we ask, how would you make your trip if this path or lane or whatever you use to make your trip, if we took it away? And our goal here is to do something a little different than the previous studies. So we're just looking at current cyclists, so we're not capturing people that don't ride their bike. We're asking them, what would you do if you take this away? And how this is a little different than previous studies is we're assuming that if you're currently riding your bike on this bicycle path or this bicycle lane, you probably know what it's like to not ride your bike on one of these things, right? You probably had to ride on some street to get to the bicycle lane or path. You're probably familiar with riding a bicycle on some other type of infrastructure. You probably know what it's like to drive in a car. Right? You know the relevant options. Instead of asking someone that currently doesn't ride a bike, would you ride a bike if I gave you this bike lane? Well, you've never ridden a bike before. You may have never seen a bike lane or a bicycle path wherever you are. And so you might not be able to accurately sort of judge what you would do. So we're kind of hoping that asking this retrospective question we might get a better, sort of more accurate response. That was our sort of goal. We don't have any way to judge whether this response is more accurate than the other way around, but logically we thought probably would. And it's just an easy way to do it. And this is a little clip out of the survey. It has actual wording. It was a paper survey that we hand out right there at the station. And it's just one, it's the front and back of a piece of paper. There was also a QR code on it. You could scan it with the iPhone and just do it later. And there was it was also, so you could email it in. This thing you could take with you to work and just it was postage paid. You could drop it in the mailbox or just complete it there on site. Most people just completed it on site. And we had people able to translate it into Spanish. We have a large Spanish population. And so the gray circles are where these Bike to Work Day stations were set up. And let's see, there's a laser here. So here. There were basically, and there's a little one up there, and a little one here. They were basically set at places where there was room to set up these stations, and they set them up in the same place every year. So I tried to convince them to set up more, but that wasn't not this year. But they're major thoroughfares for cyclists and all sorts of commuters. There's our main sort of routes. And then downtown, this is downtown. And this area is what we call uptown, and this is sort of the university area. And those are the three main centers for employment. So it's not totally geographically dispersed, and we're not going to get a completely representative sample, but this was sort of the best we could do. We got about 535 complete surveys. And so we have survey population on the left, and on the right is the regional traveling public's demographics from a recent household travel survey in Albuquerque. And they pretty much match. They're very similar. I don't think this accurately represents the cycling demographics because what you can't tell not being from Albuquerque is that where those stations were located are not in the very poor areas of the city where cycling patterns are going to vary a lot more. So this survey was also done just during the morning commute because these volunteers, they have jobs too, I guess, and they can't stand out there all day. So we didn't pick up people working different kinds of odd shifts, and they generally weren't in the lower income parts of the city. So while our population matches the general population that travels, I think it's probably skewed a little towards rich white men. Yeah. We have, this is commute, yeah. And there's a lot of poverty. I think there's a lot of women staying home with large families. I don't know, but it was kind of surprising. And I checked it with the NHTS, and we have similar kind of demographic. Yeah. So, it looks like it's representative, but I don't think that's what it is. And so this plot here is broken. So it's the share of respondents, and it's the share of two groups of respondents, right? So we have those that stated on the survey they currently use a bicycle path, and those that do not use a bicycle path. So the survey we handed out, we said, we didn't ask about the trip they were making because this was Bike to Work Day, and people were probably making some, going out of their way to hit one of these stations. So we asked, do you normally think of a trip that you regularly make, and then ask a bunch of questions about it. And so from here, we can see that we have the group of people that use a bike path and the group that don't, and these are sort of their responses to questions. The group that doesn't use the bike path, they were making more regular trips. They were, there wasn't any difference in male, female split, which is a little different than prior research that showed that males were more likely to be sort of out on the streets and female more on bicycle paths, but we didn't find that. And, there's a little different in the demographics here. The main thing was that those that use the bike paths were making less frequent trips, but they were still pretty frequent trips. And the bars are confidence intervals, 95%. And we also asked, what was important in choosing your route. Again, broken out by those that were using bicycle paths and those who were not. And the main differences were the respondents that don't use the bicycle path, right? They were a little more concerned with sort of shortest, quickest route, which makes sense, versus those that were using the bicycle path. That was less of a concern. Of course, we asked, was the presence of a bicycle path a factor? And of course, those using the path, that was a pretty strong decision. And everything else was kind of the same. So these are our results. So now what we've done, this group of data, we asked, do you ride a bicycle? Did you make your trip on a bicycle path? And now we ask that question, would you continue riding if I took away the bicycle path? And we have two groups of people, right? So in the orange, you continue to bike. In the blue, you said, no, you take away this bicycle path, I'm not going to ride my bike. And so 70% of respondents said they'd continue riding their bike if we took away this bicycle path. And 30% said, no, I'm not going to ride my bike anymore. And of that 30%, 25% indicated they were going to drive a car. And a few percent transit and walk or just wouldn't make the trip altogether. And then we broke out those responses by some of the demographics and some of these other factors. And you're more likely to continue biking, though it may not necessarily be statistically significant, if you were making more frequent trips. And there was really no difference in gender or race, income, all these other things. I mean, generally, you can see there's some differences, but they're not statistically. Then we asked about some additional information about this decision. So we asked, in this question here, we asked, so why did you make this decision? What were the main factors that sort of drove this choice to continue biking or not continue biking? And for both groups, safety was the number one concern. And we found this really odd, that the group that said, in orange, continue to bike without the bicycle path, and safety is my biggest concern. So we kind of explained this as they misinterpreted the question. It's supposed to be, why did you make this specific choice? Not about, we think this is probably saying, just my largest concern as a cyclist is safety. So that, I think that's what's going on there. But what's maybe of more relevance here is the group continuing to bike also indicated that exercise or physical activity was really important. And so they were, maybe say, well, it's going to be less safe, but I'm really concerned about, I want some physical exercise, and so I'm going to continue to bike anyways. We didn't find much, these other factors weren't really that different. And again, we kind of just broke out the previous question about the route choice factors in general, and as you can see, there's a whole lot of difference whether you were concerned about travel time or how fast your trip was or hills or anything like that, between the group that would continue biking and the group that would not. So the main thing was exercise. That was the main difference. So to look at this a little more comprehensively, and since we're scientists and engineers, we did some modeling to try to tease out what might be going on here a little more formally. And so we built some regression models, and these are pretty simple models of just, right, you either continue to bike or you don't if we take away the path. We did have all the information about what other mode you would choose, whether it be transit or walking, or you wouldn't make the trip. That was only about 5% or less of the trips, and so we just lumped it all into this is you bike or you don't bike. And so the frequency of trips was a significant factor, and we kind of saw that on the previous plots, right? So if you make more frequent trips, you're more likely to continue biking without that infrastructure. This race variable showed up as significant, and kind of saw that on the plots too. That I think that probably goes. I don't know why exactly that's significant, but was. And then of course the presence of this infrastructure was an important factor in this decision to continue bike. So if you had a real preference for a bicycle path and we take it away, you don't bike. And then the exercise thing we saw, that was important. And what we did tease out in one of these models was environmental concern showed up to be slightly significant. So if you did have some concern about the environment, you were maybe a little more likely to continue biking as well. So that's sort of the conclusion of this first part about what we found from our fairly simple little survey asking people who currently ride their bikes on these paths what they do if we take it away. So the main finding is that 70% of people, they're just going to bike anyways. But we find 30% of people wouldn't. So these paths are making a difference. 30% of the cyclists we can observe on these paths may have been driving their car before and state they would drive their car if this wasn't here. So it seems to provide some more evidence that this infrastructure is actually getting people out of their cars and onto bikes. And since we saw that the frequency of your trips, we didn't really pick anything up in cycling. We got one little slightly significant cycling experience, but it seems like they might play some role in recruiting new cyclists, and once you get used to it and start making more frequent trips, that could be sort of tied up with the experience variable, then you become maybe a little more willing to bike without these paths. But we don't have any strong evidence of that, but that's what I suspect. So that's the first part. So then go into part two. We try to take these results and say, okay, those 30% of the people that wouldn't bike, what's their impact on traffic and air quality? That's the next part. So here's our method. We're going to determine, we're going to take our survey results, try to scale it up to the regional population of cyclists. And then we're going to make two travel demand modeling scenarios, one with our current situation and one where we take those 30% of people that said they would be driving cars or not using their bike, and we put them in cars and we put them on the road, and we see how traffic changes in air quality. So we use a regional travel demand model to do that, and we use MOVE's, EPA's emission factor model to do the emissions. So we start with our regional household travel survey, which was just done last year, and we use that to sort of figure out how many cyclists we have. So from our travel demand model, we have 394,000 morning commute trips in Albuquerque by any mode. And 2% of those are bicycle trips. Now, this is a rough 2% because I don't know how many people are familiar with these regional household travel surveys. And you should all know that they happen, I hope. I don't know, is Deb still teaching her travel demand modeling course? Can't blame Deb. Okay. So, you typically send out a few thousand of these things, and right, we know bicycle share is usually pretty low, so you're only going to capture a few people responding and say, yeah, I rode a bike for this trip or not. So we have small sample size. And so this 2%, if I do some confidence intervals around it, it's kind of big. It's not very reliable, but we're going with it just for, I said this is a work in progress, so we're just going to assume it's 2%, and that's based off this household survey. It could be 1%, it could be 0.5%, it could be 4%. We get 6,300 morning commute trips. And then, based on our survey, 65% of these occur on bicycle paths. We're just using the proportion from our survey, assuming somehow our survey captured a completely representative sample, which we know not, but it's not too bad. So we get 4,000 trips now on bicycle paths in the morning. And then 19.6% of the respondents in our survey said that they would drive a car if we took away the bicycle path. That leaves us, so we have 808 trips avoided. So we're going to put in 808 trips back into the travel demand model and see if we can measure anything. And so how a travel demand model works now, everyone should know this, I hope. A 4-step model, right? It's not fancy like new activity-based models. This is your basic, pretty standard travel demand model. This is the model used by the Metropolitan Planning Organization in Albuquerque. And so there's trip generation, how many, these are the TAZs, right? So in each TAZ, we estimate first how many trips are generated, where do they go around from each TAZ to each TAZ, then what mode is used to travel between these TAZs, and then finally everything gets loaded onto an actual transportation network to figure out the traffic. And it all loops back a bunch of times. And so what we did was we updated the trip distribution table after the mode choice step. So the mode choice step in this model determines how many of the trips going from each one of these zones to every other zone occur by each mode and how many trips there are. We took our survey information and we put those 808 bikes, or which are now car trips, and we allocated them into these trip matrices and took them out of the bicycle trip matrix. And then we let the assignment procedure go and figure out how the traffic will go. Then we get some output that looks like this from the travel demand model. And this below is showing traffic volumes. And so you can see in red, the redder orange colors are more traffic. And you can see our interstates there. And we have similar, we can make similar, we have similar data for speed on each link, other attributes. So we pull out the morning traffic volume, the morning speeds. We build some speed versus emission factor curves like this on the top right. That's for carbon dioxide. We have it for all the air pollutants, and we generate that with EPA's MOVES emission factor model. And then we apply link by link. We go and find the speed, and we get the emission factor for that speed, and we get the traffic volume for that link, and we estimate the amount of emissions, and then we sum it all up at the end. So we look at these link by link emission estimates. Kind of a unique way we've been developing this emission factor model for Albuquerque. And when we do that, here's what we find. So we can reduce vehicle trips by 0.2%. But what's really interesting here is look at the change in VMT is 0.4%. And the change in vehicle hours traveled, the measure of congestion, is 7.8%. So what this is sort of indicating to us, if you believe this travel demand model results at all, travel demand model has like some, not very precise. They're probably plus or minus 2%, 200% accuracy. But we're hoping in sort of relative sense these still make sense. But what this indicates to us is that if you just think about the vehicle trips that might be avoided from having this bicycle infrastructure, that's not necessarily a great indicator of its impact on traffic. Because what turns out in Albuquerque is these paths are long-distance grade separated bicycle paths. These trips are really long. Some of these cyclists are riding 15 miles each way. And what we're finding is, these trips are really long. So they're substituting for relatively long or longer than average vehicle trips. And so it has it has a more significant impact on traffic than you would think. and speed changes a little, hours delay, another congestion estimate. And if we look at emissions, right, same thing. So we have a small change in the number of trips. We get relatively large change in emissions, again, because these are longer trips. These trips also reduced or increased the, or these trips reduce the speed of traffic in the morning. So this is a congested morning commute. We put 800 more cars on some of these, into the system, and that just reduces speed even more. And if we go back and look, right, there's a pretty sharp curve in a lot of emission rates with speed. So we have a little more traffic volume and a little bit slower speeds, and so we have more than proportional change in emissions. Oh, yeah. We asked people their origin and destination on the original survey, and so we just allocated proportionally. So we asked what intersection did your trip start at, and where did you end in that original survey, and we geocoded that, and we adjusted those trips between those TAZs. It's not the best approach because there are probably trips and get anyone in a survey, and we just left those as they are. So it's
but the distances.
That's where we get the distances. So yeah. So a lot of these trips, actually, we should go back and look at this map here. A lot of these cyclists were coming from up here and over here. And these are where wealthy white men live, right? And this is a nice ride into town. This is about a 1,500-foot elevation difference. It's a nice downhill cruise into town, and it's a really good workout. These are these exercise people, right? For the results, it's a good workout on the way home. But everyone can commute to downtown without pedaling, basically, in this region. It's all downhill. So you don't have to sweat or anything. You get your workout on the way home. And these are there's good paths to facilitate that. So that's what we find. Now, I call this work in progress. I'm a little skeptical of the 2% bicycle mode share. I don't think we quite have that. I don't know if the travel demand model, is really sensitive enough to pull out these little changes we see here. If you know much about this, these are point estimates. We never put confidence intervals or figure out the errors in these travel demand models. It's really complicated. If someone can figure out how to do that, it'd be great. But the thought is when we use these models in a relative sense, we take this one model and we change some things, and it causes some change in the direction we would expect. It seems, we use that and say, well, there's 2% change. But it wouldn't be significantly different if we could measure the errors. But it seems to indicate there's an impact. And I think what's illustrative here is not so much that we've got a 2% change in trips, but that these trips, the impact on air quality and congestion is more than proportional to just the change in the trips. I think that's what was interesting. And the other part that I think is important is that for better or worse, whether you think these models are great or not, these models are used to allocate hundreds of millions of dollars or billions of dollars, think about the whole country, in transportation funds. MPOs collect a bunch of projects for their tip, and they put them all into this travel demand model, and they run it, and they calculate these congestion metrics and these air quality metrics. And then they might run another scenario where they have a few different projects in or out, or baseline where they don't put those projects in, and they find little 1% and 2% changes in these things typically, and they make decisions off that. So we're just doing the same thing with bicycle infrastructure to kind of give these bicycle projects a fair, a fair consideration in these decisions. So you have a bunch of highway projects or transit projects that get modeled like this, and we can show you these graphs of scenario A versus scenario B and how it changes traffic and air quality. I think that puts a lot of weight on those decisions. And then when you say, yeah, we're going to build some bicycle paths too, might reduce trips by 1% or 2%, but there's no corresponding information like this. You didn't go through this rigorous, complicated travel demand modeling thing. I think it also demonstrated that we can evaluate this bicycle infrastructure in the same analytical framework as all the other transportation projects so they can get a sort of a fair shake. I feel very skeptical of the travel demand model for any project. Put it out there. But we used it. Everyone else. So the general conclusions here are the bicycle infrastructure seems to reduce motorized vehicle use, and I feel pretty confident in that finding, at least in Albuquerque. I think it plays some sort of intermediate role in sort of recruiting new cyclists. I think that's pretty consistent with what people think. And the reductions in motor vehicle use are small, but I think they're significant. Talking about a potential 0.5% to 1% change in emissions and traffic. Those are significant if you go and look at these different scenarios that MPO has put out there for the transportation plans. The differences between their preferred plan and sort of the baseline do nothing are usually just a few percent. So in that context, these are pretty significant. And I think it's important to kind of evaluate these projects the same way we evaluate everything else. So it's all kind of in the same, not comparing apples to oranges type of thing. That's it. So I'm happy to take any questions. That's downtown LA, the I-5. So yeah, some of these, I should give credit, some of these photographs of the roads without vehicles on them that were in the slideshow are from my neighbor when I lived in Santa Monica. He's a photographer. And he created a whole series of these pictures around LA that are time series with his camera, and he edited out by overlapping all the photos, all the vehicles. And if you look really closely, this isn't super high res on the screen, but all the traffic lights are green. And he has a whole series of these. I wanted to put them up on billboards around LA when I worked at NRDC. That had something. I think that's one interpretation. We didn't really probe into, do those people also not have a car? Are they more dependent on biking? Are they, is there some travel costs? We didn't probe that deep, and we've been trying to keep our survey to one page. But we're trying to refine it over time, and that's definitely something we want to probe more into next time, was why specifically that the demographics were different. Could be you could be more dependent on it. I mean, 2% is what we get out of it. This is a work in progress. We're not that second part. We haven't published any of that. We're close to our TRB, but we're still working on it. We want to figure out. We have all this trail counter data, so we want to try to use that with the household travel survey to find some way to kind of validate, better distribute the trips between the TAZs, try to find people's actual routing. We're routing them through the travel demand model over the road network. We don't have a bicycle path network in the travel demand model, so we're working on that as well. For right now, we kind of just went with our kind of best guesses from data we have, but we want to try that types of scenario analysis. Also, we want to run that travel demand model a couple of different times. There's some stochasticity in it. Better than nothing.
So have you shared this yet with them?
Yes, they like it. Justifies what they've been doing. So let me try to paraphrase, because I forgot I'm supposed to put the questions in here. The main question was, this is looking at the use phase of the environmental impacts of these projects, and there are a number of other considerations. Looking at the emissions, there's the life cycle costs, and the environmental impacts of the materials to build these different infrastructures, and some of them use existing infrastructure, some will require new ones, so a more comprehensive analysis might consider those things. Completely agree. This research is basically focused on demand, right? Who's using this infrastructure? If we want to go, just because we showed people use this, that shouldn't be the end of the decision to go build this stuff. That's a totally different question. We haven't gotten to the cost at all. We've showed that, okay, we avoided 800 vehicle trips with, let's say, $25 million of infrastructure. Is that a good, use of money? I don't know. Now, all this infrastructure serves other purposes. I don't know, one of those signs on the bike path talked about horse crossing. So people ride their horses along here. There's tons of recreational users. What's the impact on safety? These are completely grade separated facilities. If that just saves a few lives per year, or a life per year, that could justify it. So there are tons of stuff we haven't considered if we're talking about should we build these facilities. Here we're just looking at, do these facilities accomplish some of the things that we've been saying they do? They reduce traffic. But I think your point's valid. If we want to say, do they reduce emissions, we should consider, did we create a bunch of emissions to build the thing? Yeah. So the question is about safety of bicycle paths, lanes, and about there's sort of a lack of data on the off-road facilities, because we collect the sort of uniform police reports kind of are about road traffic. And we're doing some traffic safety stuff in Albuquerque with bikes and pedestrians, and reporting is a huge issue because some police officers just don't even write down stuff about bicycles to them. And then, it just might be, bicycle is hit. Nothing else. Can't do much with that. And then, I don't know what goes on in the paths in Albuquerque. If they get reported, probably only if the police officer shows up for some reason, if it was serious enough. I'm not going to wade into the debate over our bicycle paths or lanes or none of those safer than other, because I know it's a loaded area, and I'm not really qualified to say anything about that. But these bicycle paths in Albuquerque are completely grade separated. There are under and overpasses, for the most part, not all, but most of them. So I would argue that as far as hitting other cars, you're less likely to be hit by a car on these because there are no cars. There are some pretty dangerous at-grade crosses in a few areas that could probably increase your risk. That said, our roads are super dangerous. We have one of the highest pedestrian and cyclist fatality rates in the country. And most of our roads are 6-lane arterials with 45-mile-an-hour speed limits, no shoulders, no on-street parking, and 3-foot sidewalks, and no streetlights. So they're very dangerous. And that's why these bicycle paths are pretty popular and why you saw 65% of our cyclists are using them. This was in the spring. It was like 70 degrees, completely sunny. Yeah, we have trail count data, the continuous counters that I was talking about. So we want to use that to try to get at, in our travel demand model, that 800 trips avoided. That might make sense for the spring and fall when the temperatures are really nice. But yeah, that's going to be less in the winter. Probably a little less in the summer too. We see in the winter though, our trail counters drop off. But that's might just be the recreational users. I don't know if the commuters keep going. I mean, clearly there are the people that bike 5 days a week. They probably go year round. It doesn't snow very much. It was snowing yesterday, but it melts as soon as the sun comes out. They don't plow or anything. So it's bikeable all year. It's cold though. I mean, it could be 0 in the morning. Yeah, I mean, this was this is a simple, as I said, this is a very simple little experiment we did, and I think it has practical value for the MPO. And I don't think the results are any worse or better than the traffic counts for the traffic estimates from these models. But one of the challenges we did have is, there's no bicycle network on this model. So when it comes to that last part of the 4-step model, the traffic assignment, or actually put roads instead of between this grid cell and this grid cell, they go on the road. We can't route the bikes onto there. So, I don't know if it's worth the cost of that model development, which can run millions of dollars in some places, to do that. But I don't see any technical reason why it would be if you had the money to do it. You have the mode choice step already, and then instead of assigning them to the road network, you'll have another route choice model, right? That imagine developing some coefficients with information like one route or the other. So it seems I keep forgetting to repeat these questions here. The question is about how to get a more representative sample, spatially and demographic-wise. So what we're trying to do, or what I'm trying to convince, what I'd love to do is get funding and do my own study, not on Bike to Work Day, but do a full-blown, purposely designed research project. I don't have any opportunity to do that right now, but so we're going to work with this Bike to Work Day survey thing for the foreseeable future. And what we're trying to do is add more locations and also extend this to the complete duration sample to capture shift workers and to go into some of the lower income communities. Now, the difficulty is in areas of the city without bicycle infrastructure, or what we see in some of the lower income areas, is those cyclists aren't using this infrastructure. They're riding their bicycle on the sidewalk or on the street, and it's going to be difficult to capture them. And so these bicycle lanes and bicycle paths on these daily commuters, it's easy to get them because they have predefined commute patterns. They all kind of funnel into these areas. So we've been thinking about handing out a survey at employment centers like Home Depot and Walmart and some of these big retail places, seeing if we get the employers to encourage employees to fill out these. But we talked a little bit. I mean, we're only a few people biking to work at some of these, and we have to reach out to a huge number. So the plan now is to slowly add a few more of these locations each year and hopefully put them in different communities. And last year we also added one station on a different day than Bike to Work Day. It was like the day after, to capture commuters to a community college that was not in class on the day of Bike to Work Day. Challenge. Our strategy now is just to add more more places around geographically. And we can determine the representativeness of our survey by looking at the household survey, stuff like that, to get some idea of whether we are kind of getting a geographical distribution. Ideally, we could do household survey with like 20,000. That money is currently not available, so we're doing the best we can.
So I was thinking, I mean, I think all those things are great, but I was thinking more like
Oh, yeah, no, that's something we haven't done yet, but that's definitely something we're interested in, is like breaking it out by the different quadrants of the city. Cities in like 4 geographic quadrants separated by some different topography yeah. There's a group over here. The people that have the nice downhill one, are they? Yeah. No, that I think is going to be really interesting. And we don't have a huge sample, but we have enough to look at some of that.
We did a little intercept survey. But something really weird happened in Davis. Here is kind of a more holistic, long-term substitution of a bicycle lifestyle for a driving lifestyle. So if you ask how many people trip, it doesn't look like 60 people.
Yeah, yeah.
Different place, they'd be driving or whatever.
Yeah, I think that's.
So then we're like, oh my gosh.
So the question was about. I was actually talking about that with Deb on a car ride. We were going down Fifth Street, like, oh, they did the whole road diet since I was last year. It's like, stuff's so complicated to figure out these impacts. And but one question that kind of comes up is we ask this question about taking away a specific piece of infrastructure that people were using. So this is something they use. Is kind of important to them, and there's no other. If you take away this one thing, there's no parallel route to go. So if you ask the same question in Davis, I take away the path along wherever. Well, there's a million other ways to ride your bike on some sort of nice facility here. So I guess in Davis, you'd have to say, if it made Davis look like someplace without any bicycle infrastructure, I just ripped out everything, what would you do? And even if you did that, I think people probably still ride their bikes around here because it's really ingrained culture, but that culture may have been facilitated by this bicycle infrastructure, but then, I know that the first bicycle lanes were built here, and that was driven because there were already a ton of cyclists here. So how did that happen? Complicated, I don't know. Yes. There's a new NCHRP RFP that was put out that is looking at bicycle stuff. And I encourage anyone interested in bicycle research
It was that they would because there was.
So one was probably.
That's what I thought.
I'd have to go look at the paper.
What's that?
Oh, so was it recently?
It's about to come out.
Okay, because I thought I
It
had.
took us a while to didn't have that much data.
Because mine is in CRA right now.
Oh, it is?
I mean, it could be under review.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
You have a nice list.
So I don't know if it'll come out.
Sure, I need to take care of something.
Yeah, I thought I had done a pretty comprehensive review, especially knowing it's here. I didn't want to miss anyone.
Yeah. But when you revise, you can.
Yeah, that's right. If I didn't have, I need to revise. I can stick it in there.
That idea previously.
Paper that Deb was an author on. Oh, okay. They asked a retrospective bike.
It's not just retrospective, it's hypothetical.
Yeah, hypothetical.
Ava.
Yeah, it came on. It was not really the focus of the paper, but it was buried in there. There was their study of the
There's a history of.
actually the don't go down there. So they all have an alternative lamp to go up and over the road. They planned to have this huge city. It didn't happen. It's what they did build is extremely suburban. It's really shoddy house construction. They had like usually like hiking a lot of houses. They did like some plastic fences that broke down. In the even the 70s, 80s, it was recently. And they just have all these dirt roads. Most of the roads are not paved. And it's become a real like tea party hotbed. And so that's those two. The MPO